Caleb Morgan was being squeezed dry, but the brutal Wyoming sun wasn't his only enemy. A powerful cattle company was trying to take his land, and they were not asking nicely. This is the story of how one stubborn rancher refused to be broken. Stick around to see what happens. The sun beat down on the territory, turning the whole landscape into a cracked, dusty anvil. Out here, the only sound was the high, lonesome whine of the wind. Caleb's small ranch was the only thing standing for miles, a testament to sheer grit. He rode the fence line with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle, but a stiffness in his back told the story of an old pain, a bullet from a war 15 years ago. That old wound ached something fierce, a constant reminder of fights he had already survived. He never spoke of the pain or the war. Caleb believed actions were the only words that mattered. He found a snapped wire on the fence, coiled in the dust like a sleeping rattlesnake. With gloved hands, he stretched the rusted metal, his breath steady in the blistering heat. His life was a series of mending things that were determined to break. He was not completely alone. An old cowhand named Harlan was his only help. Caleb found him staring at the muddy trickle that used to be their creek. Harlan spat a stream of tobacco juice. "She is drying up fast, boss." He squinted at the sky. "The cattle are getting thin. We are short-handed and short on luck." "Most men would have sold out to that big cattle company by now," Harlan mumbled. Caleb's jaw was set firm. "Then we will haul water until our backs break." Because for a man like Caleb, giving up was a line you just do not cross. Harlan was down checking the water in the drying creek. He was an old cowhand, a fellow whose skin looked like worn leather. His joints popped louder than a stick on a campfire. He was the only one who stuck by Caleb when the others left. The other hands had drifted off to easier work or bigger pay from the cattle barons moving in. Caleb rode back to meet the old man. He found Harlan just staring into the muddy ditch that was once a creek. Harlan spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "It is drying up awful fast," he said. He wiped his mouth on his stained sleeve. Caleb just nodded, looking at the cracked earth. It had been a dry winter. Harlan squinted at the sun. "We are short-handed out here, Caleb. That is the long and short of it. The cattle are getting thin. If we do not get rain soon, we will be hauling water from the deep well. Until our backs give out," Harlan finished. "Then we will haul it," Caleb said, his voice rough. Harlan shook his head. "You are one stubborn man. Most folks would have sold out to the big outfits by now. Now they'd have taken the money and found a place where the wind didn't try to bite your face off. This is my land," Caleb said, plain and simple. He turned his horse north, and that was the end of that talk. There was nothing more to say. This land was tough and mean, and it gave no second chances. But it was his land. It was the only place that let him be who he was. He'd buried his own brother in this dirt. He'd bled on it. He wasn't about to leave just because the clouds were being stingy with the rain. Down in the settlement of Red Creek, a few wooden buildings and a rough-looking church stood close together, braced against the endless plains. The heat was different there. It got trapped between the buildings, smelling heavy of horses, sawdust, and folks needing a bath. Inside the Lucky Star Saloon, the air was just thick with old beer and the smell of hot grease. Elena Marquez was in the tight, hot kitchen out back, scrubbing a big iron skillet. She was 24 years old, but her eyes looked tired like a woman who had seen twice as many years. Her dark, thick hair was pulled back tight from her face, showing the sharp cheekbones and amber skin that told the story of her mixed blood. Her daddy was a Mexican tracker, her mama from the Arapaho people. And to the folks in Red Creek, that mix made her less than everybody else. She worked hard and fast. The hot grease popped onto her hands, and the stove made her dress stick right to her back, but she never slowed her pace. She could hear the men talking in the main room, the sound of glasses, and the loud laughs of men who'd been out on the range too long. Elena wiped her forehead with her arm, leaving a dark smudge of soot. She knew what they all said about her. She heard their whispers when she went to the town well. The proper town ladies with their fancy collars would look away, like seeing her might dirty their own souls. They'd pull their children a little closer. The preacher, a man named Reverend Thorne, once stopped her on the street. He told her that just by being alive, she was a problem for good men. as if being poor was a sin she had picked out for herself. To them, she was just the saloon girl, the kitchen help, the woman who, when winter got bad and her pay was cut, had to make hard choices upstairs with men smelling of cheap whiskey and regret. She scrubbed that pan even harder, her jaws set tight. She didn't cry. Crying was for women who were safe, who had fathers or husbands to protect them. Elena only had herself. Her mother had passed away in the desert when Elena was just 12. Her father went into the mountains a year later and just never came back. She had learned to survive being hungry, being used, and being shamed by building a wall around her heart. A voice yelled from the main room, "Elena, where's that stew?" She called back. Her own voice was calm, not giving a thing away. She poured the thick stew into bowls and carried the tray out. The bartender, a bull-necked man named O'Malley, didn't even glance her way. To him, she was like a broom or a bar rag, something you use until it's worn out, then you just toss it aside. As she put a bowl down in front of a cowboy, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. He gave her a nasty grin, showing his yellow teeth. You're looking mighty fine today, Elena," he slurred. "Why not come sit with me?" She tried to pull her arm back, but his grip was strong, was like a steel trap. "I am working," she said. "Please, let go." The man just laughed, looking over at his buddies for approval. "Working hard, I bet. How much for you to stop and come sit on my lap?" "I have to get back to the kitchen," she insisted, her voice dropping low and tight. Ali looked over from the bar. "Let the girl work, Jeb. She's got enough to do." The ranch hand just cackled and shoved her away. Elena stumbled but caught herself, her face burning with shame. She hurried back to the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest like a trapped animal. She looked down at her wrist. Red welts were already rising where his fingers had dug in. She swallowed hard, tasting the bitterness. It was a familiar taste, the taste of her life here. It was about mid-afternoon when Caleb Morgan rode into Red Creek. He was needing supplies like flour, coffee, and ammunition. He tied his horse to the rail outside the general store, giving the animal a pat. The town was bustling with wagons and folks. Men were gathered on the boardwalks, talking and smoking. Caleb moved right through them like a ghost. He tipped his hat to a lady passing by, but he did not stop to talk. He knew what people thought of him. To the folks in Red Creek, he was a relic from a violent time. They knew he had fought in the range wars. They knew he lived alone out on that desolate ranch, and they reckoned it was unnatural. He walked past the saloon, intending to head over to the livery stable about the price of grain. But as he passed the narrow alley that ran behind the Lucky Star, he heard a scuffle and a sharp gasp. Caleb stopped right there. He did not want to get involved. He never wanted to get involved. But the sound came again, somebody hitting the dirt hard. He turned and walked into that alley. A fellow was standing over a woman who had fallen in the dust. It was that ranch hand from the bar, Jeb. He was kicking dirt onto her skirt. "You stole it, you little thief," Jeb snarled. "I know you did. My coin purse was right there on the table." "I never touched your money," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I was just clearing the plates." "Don't you lie to me," Jeb shouted. He reached down, grabbing a handful of her hair and jerking her head clean back. Caleb stepped forward, his boots making no sound, in the soft alley dust. "Let her go." His voice was not loud. It was a flat, calm statement. Jeb froze solid. He turned his head, still gripping the woman's hair. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the shadow where Caleb stood. "This is none of your business, Morgan," Jeb sneered, though his grip loosened just a bit. "She is a thief." "Did you see her take it?" Caleb asked. "I know her kind," Jeb spat. "They're all thieves." Caleb took 2 more steps. He stopped about 5 feet away, standing perfectly still, his right hand hanging loose. It was just inches from the worn wooden grip of the revolver at his hip. He did not posture. He did not even look angry. He looked like a man who was tired of the conversation and was ready to end it. His eyes were cold as slate, and you could not read them. "I asked if you saw her take it," Caleb said again, real slow. Jeb looked into Caleb's eyes, and then at his hand. That liquor courage started to run right out of him. Every soul in those parts knew of Caleb Morgan. They knew he was not a man who fought for sport. If Caleb drew his gun, someone ended up in the ground. I I did not rightly see it, Jeb stammered, but it is gone. Then maybe you dropped it, Caleb said, or maybe you drank it and clean forgot. Now take your hand off her. For a second, Jeb's pride fought with his good sense. Good sense won. He let go of the woman's hair and stepped back, holding his hands up. Fine, he muttered. She is not worth the trouble anyway. With a final insult, Jeb spat on the ground near her feet. He shoved past Caleb and hurried toward the street, never once looking back. Caleb stood there for a quiet moment, listening to the man's footsteps disappear. Then he looked down. Elena sat in the dirt, her breath coming in shudders. Her hair had come loose, tumbling around her face in dark messes. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide. She was just waiting for the lecture. The one about being more careful, or that a woman like her should not be working in a place like this. But Caleb did not say a word of it. Instead, he just held out his hand. She flinched, pulling back like a startled animal. Caleb did not move his hand. He waited until she saw he meant no harm. Slowly she reached out. Her hand was small and rough in his. With surprising strength, he pulled her to her feet. She dusted off her skirt, refusing to look him in the eye. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb looked at her then, and he saw the red marks blooming on her wrist. He saw the bruise already forming on her arm from the fall. But mostly he saw the deep hollows in her cheeks. She was thin, far too thin. It was the kind of thin that came from eating leftovers instead of a proper meal. "You are hurt," he said. It was not a question. "I am fine," Elena answered quickly, pushing her hair back. "It is nothing." "You should put some ice on that wrist," Caleb advised. "There is no ice here," she said, a hard edge to her voice. "And I have to get back to work." She turned to go back inside, but paused with her hand on the door. She looked backwards at him. "Why did you help me?" Caleb settled his hat. "I just do not hold with bullies." He turned and walked away before she could reply. Elena watched him go, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. He had not looked at her with greed or with disgust. He had looked at her like she was a person. It was a feeling so unfamiliar, she did not know what to call it. Inside the general store, the air was cool. It smelled of pickle brine, new leather, and coffee beans. Caleb moved down the aisles, getting a sack of flour and a tin of coffee. He placed them on the counter. The storekeeper, a man named Henderson, was talking quietly to another rancher. "I am telling you," Henderson was saying, his voice low, but not quite low enough. "Silas Grant is not stopping at the valley. He bought the Higgins place last week. Paid pay." The other rancher let out a low whistle. "Higgins held out for 2 years. Grant has a way of persuading folks," Henderson said in a dark tone. "He has hired a lot of new hands. Hard men, gun hands. Mostly. He wants to own the whole range, says the small outfits are holding things back." Caleb stood quiet, feeling their eyes on him. Henderson added, "He's after the West Ridge, too." Henderson looked right at Caleb. "Says it is good grazing land wasted on a ghost. A man with no kin doesn't need 3,000 acres. Caleb set a $5 gold piece on the counter. The sharp clink made Henderson jump. "Oh, Mr. Morgan, didn't see you." Caleb slid the coin forward. "For the supplies and 2 boxes of 45s. Henderson scurried for the ammo, his hands shaky. "Just talking about the weather." "I heard you," Caleb said, grabbing his things. He made no threat. He offered no defense either. He just walked on out, his jaw set hard. Silas Grant. Caleb knew his kind. Men who figured the world could be bought and fenced. Men who thought power was the only real law. He had seen enough of them in the war. He felt a cold knot in his gut. The piece he had carved out here was fragile. It felt like the wolves were circling. He finished up his business at the livery. By the time he packed his saddlebags, the day was dying and the sky was dark. The wind had changed. It was picking up speed and whipping up the dust. The temperature dropped fast. A real bad storm was rolling in. He got on his horse. He pulled his collar up, hoping to beat the worst of it. The ride was 2 hours. But in this dark, with this storm, it could take 3. His horse fought the wind. The town lights winked out behind him. About a mile out, he saw it. A lone figure stumbling along the side of the road in the deep ruts, head bent against the gale. Caleb frowned. It was a dangerous night to be on foot. He urged his horse forward, slowing as he came alongside. The figure looked up. It was Elena. She was clutching a small bundle of clothes, her hair wild in the wind. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin work dress and a shawl against the cold. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. Elena. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she was shivering hard. Elena, Caleb called over the wind. What are you doing out here? She hugged her bundle tighter. O'Malley fired me. It was Jeb, that man you stopped. He complained to O'Malley I was bad for business, so he told me to get out. He called me a troublemaker. She stared into the dark. I had nowhere to go in town. I thought maybe I could walk to the next settlement. That's 20 miles, Caleb said. We'll freeze, or the coyotes will get you before you make it 5 steps. Elena looked back at him, her face a mask of despair, but her chin was held high. I have nowhere else to go. Caleb looked up at the stormy sky. A jagged streak of lightning split the clouds. Seconds later, a low rumble of thunder followed. The wind howled, throwing dirt and grit against his duster. He looked back at the woman. She was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. If he left her here, she would surely die. It was that simple. And despite his wish for solitude, despite the trouble she might bring, he knew he could not leave her to the elements. He had walked past too many fallen men in the war. He would not add her to his conscience. He sat there for a long, tense moment. The horse shifted under him, nervous about the coming storm. Caleb looked down the dark road, then back at Elena. Get on, he said flatly. Elena blinked, confused. What? Get on the horse, Caleb said, shifting his boot out of the stirrup. I am not leaving you out here. Elena hesitated. She looked at his calloused hand, then at his hard face. She saw the same cold expression from before, but underneath it she saw a flicker of reluctant decency. I cannot pay you, she said softly. I did not ask for payment, Caleb replied. Now climb up. This storm is about to break. She reached up for him. He gripped her bruised arm and swung her up onto the horse behind him. She settled in, her arms wrapping around his waist. He could feel how cold she was, right through his heavy coat. Hold on tight, Caleb said. He nudged the horse into a steady trot, heading away from the town lights. They rode into the dark, howling emptiness of the plains. Behind him, Elena pressed her face against his back. She closed her eyes against the dust, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself hope. The horse moved with a slow, deliberate pace, picking its way carefully down the rough road. Caleb kept the pace steady, not for the horse, but for the woman clinging to him. The wind had turned vicious, carrying a biting chill that cut through their clothes. Elena sat straight and stiff, her arms wrapped tight around Caleb's waist. She was shaking uncontrollably. The shivers ran right through her and against Caleb's back. Her dress was just thin cotton, fine for a saloon kitchen, but useless against a Wyoming night. Caleb pulled on the reins, bringing the horse to a gentle halt. The animal huffed, its breath steaming in the dark air. Why are we stopping? Elena asked, her voice thin. Caleb did not answer right away. He swung his leg over the saddle and dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He then began to unbutton his heavy canvas duster. It was lined with wool, stained with trail dust and hard work. He shrugged it off, and the cold hit him instantly, but he paid it no mind. He walked to her side of the horse and held the big coat up. Put this on, he said. Elena looked down at him, stunned, of his horse in the dim light. His face was all shadows, the brim of his hat hiding his eyes. She paused. Taking his coat felt too close for comfort. In her life, kindness always had a cost. I'm all right, she lied, her teeth chattering so hard they clicked. You are turning blue, Caleb said simply. Put it on. He did not ask again, just reached up and draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, the sleeves hanging way past her hands. His warmth was still in the wool. He smelled of tobacco, hard work, and the rain that soaked them both. Thank you, she whispered, pulling it tight. Caleb got back on his horse, moving a little stiffly. He settled in the saddle and she wrapped her arms around his middle again. This time, with the thick coat between them, she held on just a little tighter as they rode on. The prairie was quiet, but it was a loud kind of quiet, full of wind and the steady beat of horse hooves. To fight off the cold and the silence between them, They started to talk. It was not easy conversation, just bits and pieces thrown into the dark. You are not from around here, Caleb stated. No, Elena answered. My mother was Arapaho. My father was from Mexico. Where are they now, he asked. Gone, she said, the word worn smooth from use. My mother passed in the desert basin. The heat got her. We ran out of water 2 days before we found a well. Caleb nodded in the dark. He knew that basin. It was a graveyard that did not bother with burying. And your father, he asked? He made it another year, Elena said. Went into the mountains to trap and never returned. Hard winter that year. I figure the snow or a bear got him. I was 12. 12, Caleb said back. That is mighty young to be on your own. I learned to work, she said, her voice hard. Scrubbed floors, washed clothes until my hands bled. I did what I had to. He did not offer her any pity. He just offered a piece of his own story. I left home at 16. I figured the army would be a grand adventure. And was it? She asked. It was mud and sickness and men crying for their mothers, Caleb said. I learned men are not much different from animals when they get scared. Elena leaned her cheek against the rough coat. You hold that gun like you know how to use it. Learned that in the war, Caleb said, and learned it all over again out here. These range wars were different. Just neighbors killing neighbors over a little water or a fence line. Is that how you got the limp? She asked. He tensed up a bit. Yes, a fight down near the border, bullet to the hip. Took 6 months to heal right, Oti, and it reminds me every single day that I am just a man. Why do you live so far out? She asked. Even for a rancher, you are way out here. I reckon I've seen enough people to last a lifetime, Caleb said. Folks always want something. I prefer the company of cattle. More. That wind started to howl, screaming like a banshee. Then the first raindrops hit, hard and cold as buckshot. In just a moment, the sky just fell open. This was not any spring shower. It was a gully washer. Hold on tight, Caleb hollered over the racket. He kicked that horse into a dead run. The dry ground turned to slick grease right under them. Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting everything up in flashes of white. In those quick bursts, Elena saw where they were. Just rolling hills, with mesquite bushes getting whipped by the wind. And up ahead, the dark shapes of buildings. They tore through a gate, the horse skidding to a stop by the barn. Caleb jumped down and reached up for her. Elena near about tumbled right into his arms, her legs gone numb. The coat was soaked, but she was still dry inside. He set her on the porch of the main house. Get on inside, he shouted, turning to take the horse to the barn. Elena's stiff fingers fumbled with the door latch. It finally gave way, and she stumbled into the dark house. The door slammed shut, quieting the storm just a little. She just stood there, dripping and shivering on the floor. The whole place smelled like an old ranch, all wood smoke and leather. It was pitch dark inside. Then a match struck. Caleb was by a table, lighting an oil lamp. Its flame flickered to life, giving the room a warm glow. He had come in the back after putting up the horse. He was soaked clean through, his shirt stuck right to him. Water dripped from him, darted from his hat. He looked at her and nodded towards the stove. There is wood in the box. I will get a fire started. He moved quick, poking the embers in the old iron stove and adding some kindling. Soon, a fire was crackling, pushing back the cold. He pointed down a hallway. There is a spare room down there. First door on your right, Caleb said. You will find blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. But Elena did not budge. She stood by the door, pulling that wet coat tight around herself. The rush was wearing off. A cold fear was settling in her gut. Here she was in some stranger's house, miles from anywhere. Nobody would hear her if she screamed. She knew how this kind of story usually ended. She had seen it before. She took a deep breath, hardening her face. So, which room is yours? She asked. Caleb stopped, his wet hat in his hand. Mine is at the end of the hall, he said. And what happens now? Elena's voice was flat, trying to hide her fear. Caleb frowned a little. You get out of those wet clothes and you get some sleep. Elena stepped back. Her back hit the rough wood of the door. And what is the price for all this, Mr. Morgan? Men like you do not just save women like me for nothing. Am I supposed to expect you in my room tonight? Is that the deal? Caleb just stood there, real still. The firelight danced on his face, showing the deep lines around his eyes. It lit up that old scar on his jaw. He did not look mad. He just looked tired, bone tired. He could see the pure terror she was trying to hide behind that hard talk. He saw a woman the world had taught a tough lesson, that she was something to be bought and sold. He walked to a chair and sat down hard, starting to pull off his muddy boots. My brother, my boy, Samuel, used to sleep in that room, Caleb said softly. He's been gone 4 years now. A fight over a piece of land. He was just 19. I haven't had the heart to change a thing, but the bed is sturdy. He pulled the other boot off, then looked her right in the eye. I don't want you in my bed, Elena. That is not why you are here. I brought you here because the other choice was to leave you for dead in a ditch, and I already have enough ghosts following me around. Lena stared at him, trying to find a lie in his weathered face. There was not one. Then what is it you want from me? She asked. Work, Caleb said plainly. He leaned back, rubbing his sore hip. This house is falling apart. I am no good at keeping it, and Harlan is too old to be scrubbing floors. You cook, you help where you can. You will eat at my table and sleep in a warm bed. That is the deal. His voice was firm. He was just stating the facts. Elena felt a knot in her chest begin to loosen. This was more confusing than a cruel demand. She knew how to fight a demand, how to survive one. But simple, honest-to-goodness decency? That was a foreign country to her, and she had no map. She gave a slow nod. I can cook, and I can clean. Good, Caleb said. He stood and walked to the kitchen cupboard. He pulled out a loaf of bread and some dried beef. Eat something, then get some rest. We get up before the sun here. The next few days were a whirlwind of hard work. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean. The Texas sun beat down something fierce. Elena took to her new life with the determination of a cornered animal. She started in the kitchen. It was a sorry sight, coated in layers of grease and dust. She found buckets and rags, heated water on the stove, and scrubbed until the room was steamy and hot. She scrubbed the floors until the pine boards were pale again. She scoured the old iron pots until they shined. Caleb and Harlan left before dawn and did not return until after dusk, working cattle way out on the range. This left Elena alone with the house. It was the silence that got to her first. In town, there was always noise. The piano from the saloon, men yelling, wagons rattling by. But out here, the silence was a heavy blanket. At first, it felt strange. But as she worked, she started to hear things inside of it. The wind whistling through the roof, the cry of a hawk high overhead, the old house groaning as it settled. And for the first time in years, the noisy panic in her own mind began to quiet down. That feeling of always having to look over her shoulder, listening for trouble, it started to fade just a little. She found Caleb's work shirts piled in a corner of his room, which she entered only to gather the laundry. The shirts were torn at the elbows and missing buttons. She sat on the porch in the warm afternoon light. With a needle and thread, she mended them with small, neat stitches. When Caleb came home in the evenings, the house smelled of soap and hot stew. He would stop on the porch to scrape the mud from his boots, and he would look around the clean room as if he did not recognize it. He never said much. He would eat the food she had made and nod his thanks. But he watched her. He noticed things, like how she never ever sat down. With her back to a wall, she always sat where she could see the door and see him. He noticed how she'd go stiff as a board if he came in too quiet, her hand always twitching toward a pocket. He figured she kept a knife there. One morning, passing her room, he saw her sleeping. The sun was on the quilt, and one foot was sticking out from the covers. She was wearing her boots. Caleb stopped cold. A dark look crossed his face. He knew that habit all too well. It was the habit of someone always ready to run for their life. He had done it himself after the war. He walked on, quiet as a mouse. He would not ask, and he would not tell her she was safe, because words do not mean much. He would just let the quiet days stack up, one on top of the other, until her bones learned what her mind would not. But that peace from the storm was gone in a flash. The heat came back meaner than ever, and a drought settled over the land like a fever. The sky was just a hot, white glare. All that new green grass burned yellow and brittle. The creek, which had been running good, pulled back into a few sheet-made muddy puddles. Soon it was just mud. The cattle got anxious, hiding in the shade with their ribs starting to show. Caleb and Harlan worked themselves down to nothing. One evening, Caleb came inside, his face caked with dust. "The deep well," he said, his voice raspy. "We have to haul water from it." The creek's bone dry. It was the worst kind of work. The windmill pumped the water, but then you had to haul it in barrels to the pastures. "I can help," Elena said. Caleb just looked at her hands. They were getting rough, but still small. "This is hard work, Elena," he told her. "I am not helpless, Caleb," she shot back, her eyes flashing. "I eat your food. I will earn my keep." Caleb stared at her for a second, then gave a slow nod. "All right, you drive. Harlan and I will load." And for the next week, that is what she did. She lived in the sun, in the dust, driving that wagon. Her hands blistered from the reins. The sun cooked her head right through her bonnet, but she never said a word. She hauled water until her shoulders burned, and she watched Caleb. He never stopped. Paid his limp no mind, nor the heat, just kept moving, lifting barrels that would have snapped another man in two. He was gentle with the cattle in his own rough way. One afternoon, she looked up and saw old Harlan watching her from a distance. He leaned on his shovel. "You work pretty hard for a town girl," he grunted out. "I am not from town," she said firm-like. "I am a woman who pays her way." Harlan spit. "Caleb's a good man," Harlan said. "Life has been tough on him, but he is good." "I know," she said soft. "Does the town know that?" Harlan asked, giving her a hard look. "Or do they only see what they want?" "They take what they want," Elena said. "They always do." The heat finally broke, but a dry, scouring wind took its place. It picked up all that loose topsoil, turning the air into a brown haze. The sun looked like a dim orange coin. Night fell, but the wind just howled and battered the walls of the old ranch house. The windows rattled in their frames, a clatter that sounded just like knuckles rapping on the glass. Inside, the air was thick and stifling. Caleb sat reading by a lamp while Elena was in the kitchen. She was drying the last of the supper dishes. A hard gust of wind hit the house with a real thud. It made the timbers groan and threw a handful of sand against the kitchen window. Elena froze. The plate she was holding slipped and shattered on the floorboards. The sound took her right back 3 years ago to a flimsy door at a mining camp. She could hear the angry men pounding on the wood, felt the wood splintering. The window rattled again, loud and demanding. Elena gasped, backing away from the sound. She slid down the wall until she was curled up in a corner, her arms wrapped tight over her head. It felt like the room was closing in. The wind sounded just like their voices. "No," she whispered. "Please go away." Caleb heard the plate break and set his book down. He walked into the kitchen. He saw the broken plate on the floor. Then he saw her pressed into the corner between the stove and the wall. She was rocking just a little, gasping for air like a wounded animal. Caleb sized up the situation right away. He had seen this before. This was not a clumsy woman who dropped a dish. This was a soldier trapped in a nightmare. He knew better than to rush over or try to touch her. That would only make it worse. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged about 10 feet away. He rested his hands on his knees where she could see them. "Elena," he said. His voice was calm and low. "It is just the wind." Elena did not even look up. "They are here," she choked out. "They are at the door." "No one is at the door," Caleb said gently. "The gate is locked. Harlan is in the bunkhouse. It is just you and me, and the wind." He let a moment pass. The window rattled, and Elena whimpered. "I hate the wind too," Caleb said, like they were just talking. "Back in Virginia, we were pinned down in a trench for 3 whole days. The cannon fire never let up. It shook the ground so hard my teeth ached." Elena's rocking slowed down. She was listening. "The dirt," Caleb continued, his voice steady. "That was the worst part of it. The explosions kicked up so much dirt, you could taste it. Tasted like sulfur. I thought that taste would never leave my mouth. I thought the noise would never stop. But it did. The guns went quiet. He saw her curled up tight. You're safe now, Elena. That door is holding. These walls are thick. Nothing is getting in tonight. Elena raised her head, her eyes wide. Her face was streaked with tears. She looked at Caleb, sitting right there on the floor. He looked as solid as a mountain, and he was not looking at her with any pity. He was looking at her with understanding. He knew. Is it just the wind? She asked. She whispered. Caleb nodded. Just the wind, throwing sand. Sounds like someone knocking, does not it? Yes, she breathed out. The wind is a liar, Caleb said. It tells you things that are not so. Elena let out a long breath, her hands falling from her hair. I am so sorry about the plate. The plate is nothing, Caleb said. We have others. He stayed right where he was. He was giving her space to pull herself together. He watched her breathing start to slow. When she finally moved, she wiped her face on her apron. Caleb stood up nice and slow. Just leave the pieces, he said gently. We will get them in the morning. He walked back to the main room. He picked up his book and pretended to read. He was letting her know it was all over, that she had not ruined a thing or scared him off. Elena stayed in the kitchen just listening. The window rattled again. She flinched, but this time she looked right at the glass. Just the wind, she thought. Just a liar. She looked across the room at the back of Caleb's head. For the first time in a long while, that knot of fear in her chest loosened. Not because she was hiding, but because she was not alone. A thread, as thin as a spider web but strong as steel, stretched between them. It was trust. And for tonight, it was enough. The weeks after the storm brought a strange quiet to the ranch. Elena Marquez was not the same trembling woman who had huddled in the corner. The ranch demanded a certain strength, and she started finding it deep down inside. That dry Wyoming air seemed to peel away the old layers of her shame and fear. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and capable. She learned to bake bread in that old stove. She could judge the heat by the feel on her cheek, not by some gauge. She scrubbed the work shirts until they were clean and learned to listen to the land. She could tell a coyote's yip for a kill from one that meant it was lonely. The chores brought a good kind of tired that let her sleep without bad dreams. But the ranch was an island, and the town of Red Creek was full of sharks. It was a small town, and folks treated their boredom with a whole lot of gossip. The story of Caleb picking her up galloped into town, growing meaner with every telling. General store, it was no longer just being neighborly. It became a scandal. It was proof that the lone rancher was not just a recluse, but a man with loose morals, keeping a woman with a tainted past. The trouble rolled in on a Tuesday afternoon in a shiny black buggy that looked all wrong against the dusty yard. Caleb was in the corral calming a young horse that a rattlesnake had spooked. He held the rope with a steady hand, talking low to the animal when the crunch of wheels made him look up. Elena was on the porch, shaking a rug. She froze, pulling the rug to her chest as the buggy stopped. Two men got out. One was Reverend Thorne, a tall, thin man with a sharp face and eyes that found sin in everything. The other was Silas Grant. Silas was a big man who filled up a space. He was broad, wearing a fine gray wool suit that had to be roasting him, with a gold watch chain shining on his vest. He looked like a man who always ate the best steak while others got the gristle. Caleb tied the horse to a rail and walked to the gate. He kept his hat on. He did not offer a smile. He just wiped his dusty hands on his pants. Gentlemen, Caleb said, his voice flat as the plains. Mr. Morgan, Silas answered, his voice smooth as oil. We didn't see you at the town meeting last night. I was mending fences, Caleb said simply. Reverend Thorne stepped up, holding his Bible like a shield. Fences of wood are one thing, Caleb, but a man's moral fences need tending too. Caleb glanced from the preacher to Elena. She hadn't moved an inch, standing like a statue. On the porch, her face pale as a sheet, Thorne's gaze followed his lip curling with distaste. We've come about a delicate matter, Thorne said, lowering his voice for a show. There's talk, Caleb, ugly talk about your living arrangement here. Caleb just crossed his arms. Is that a fact? The community is concerned, Thorne pushed on, feeling mighty righteous. It's not proper for a single man to house a woman with her kind of history. It invites sin. It's a bad example for the good families of this valley. She works for her keep, Caleb stated plainly. Silas let out a soft, dry chuckle. Now, Morgan, we're both men of the world. We know the kind of work a woman like that is good for, and it does not involve a scrub brush. Caleb's eyes narrowed, and the air in the yard felt suddenly cold. Careful, Silas. You're on my property. I'm on land that's being wasted, Silas shot back, his smile gone. But that's another matter. Or maybe it is not. A man's reputation is everything, Caleb. And right now, yours is headed downhill. The bank hears things. They hear Caleb Morgan has lost his good sense, that he's taking in fallen women and brawling in town. Elena flinched like she had been struck. Silas leaned on the fence, his voice dropping low. Look, I'm a reasonable man. I want what's best for this valley. And for you. If you were to send that girl on her way, maybe back where she came from, it would show folks you've come to your senses. It might even make me rethink my offer on your grazing rights. Make the bank reconsider calling in that loan on your equipment. Caleb stood stock still. The prairie wind tugged at the brim of his hat. He looked at the preacher, who was nodding right along. Then he looked at Silas, who watched him with the patience of a coyote. Finally, he looked at Elena. She was just staring at her boots, with shame rolling off her in waves. Get in your buggy, Caleb said softly. Silas blinked. I beg your pardon. Get off my land, Caleb said again, louder this time. Both of you, Preacher Thorne gasped. Caleb, you cannot just dismiss the church. She is a temptation, a Jezebel. She is a human being, Caleb cut in, his voice sharp. And she stays right here as long as she chooses. If you want to worry about a soul, Reverend, you ought to worry about your own. And you, Silas, if you want this land, you will have to take it. I am not trading a woman's life for your favor. Silas's polite mask slipped, revealing the cold iron underneath. Lonely men make foolish choices, Morgan, he said quietly. They always pay dearly for them. You are holding a losing hand. Silas climbed back into the buggy. Thorne followed him, shooting one last hateful glare at the porch. With a snap of the reins, they were gone, leaving behind a cloud of dust that tasted like bitterness. That night, the silence in the ranch house felt heavy as a stone. Caleb sat with a book he was not reading. In the kitchen, Elena's hands were shaking so bad she had to slip out the back door for a breath of air. She headed for the barn to check the horses, a chore that usually calmed her spirit. As she got near the corral, she heard voices in the dark. It was Harlan and Caleb, leaning against the fence. I am telling you, Caleb, it is not just talk, Harlan was saying, his voice rough with worry. Silas has the sheriff, the judge, and now the church in his pocket. Let him have them, Caleb answered, his voice sounding bone-tired. You are fighting a war on all sides, Harlan said. And for what? A cook. She is a lightning rod for trouble. Siding with a woman like her, with her pizzazz, it just paints a bigger target on your back. Elena held her breath, her heart hammering. She waited for Caleb to say that Harlan was right, that she was not worth all this trouble. The target was already there, Harlan, Caleb said at last. It was there the day I refused to sell him the south pasture. Elena is just the excuse he is using to pull the trigger. She makes it easy for him, Harlan grunted. Maybe, Caleb said, but I am not turning her out. I walked past enough people in need during the war. I told myself I was just following orders. I am done telling myself that. She stays. Elena backed away slowly, her boots silent in the soft dust. The dust. She ran back to the house, a heavy guilt crush in her heart. He was defending her. He was risking it all. His land, his good name, his own safety. And for her. Harlan was right. She was trouble. As long as she was there, Silas had a way to get to him. She was the one weak spot in his defenses. In her room, she sat on the bed and looked around. It was simple and clean, with a quilt and a wash basin. It was the first real home she'd known in over 10 years. And because she loved it, and the man who gave it to her, she knew right then she had to leave. The sky was bruised purple when dawn broke. Pale light touched the tops of the sagebrush. The air was cold and quiet. Elena moved quietly. She packed her small bag with her few clothes, a comb, and a piece of bread. She left the coat Caleb gave her folded on the chair. She wouldn't take anything that belonged to him. She slipped out the front door, closing it without a sound. She walked down the long dirt drive, her boots making a soft crunch. She never once looked back. If she did, she knew she'd fall apart. She just focused on the road ahead and the long walk to whatever came next. Maybe a big city or west of California. Anywhere but here. She was at the main gate, a mile from the house. Her hand was on the latch when she heard a horse. She froze. It was Caleb. He sat on his horse, still as a statue, waiting under a cottonwood tree. In his duster coat and his hat pulled low, he looked like he was part of the land itself. "Going somewhere?" he asked. His voice was low and gravelly. Elena clutched her bag tighter and didn't turn around. "I'm leaving, Caleb." "I can see that," he said. He nudged his horse forward, blocking her. "Wait, you know why," she said, her voice shaking. "I heard you in Harlan. I'm just bringing you ruin." Caleb swung down from his horse. He walked toward her, his limp more noticeable in the cold air. "You're not ruining me," she cried, finally turning to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Silas will use me to destroy you. If I'm gone, he can't hurt you through me." "And where will you go?" Caleb asked softly. "Away," she said. "Just away. The world out there ain't changed, Elena. It's still a hard place that will chew you up." "I can take care of myself," she sobbed. "I've done it before." "Have you?" he asked. "Or did you just survive?" Elena dropped her bag in the dust. "You don't get it. You don't know who you're saving." "I know exactly who you are," Caleb said. "No, you don't," she screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet morning. "You see some poor girl with bad luck. But that's not me. I did what I had to, Caleb, not just when I was starving, but for a warm room, for a drink to make the night go away. I let awful men use me, men who stunk of death. It was just easier than fighting." The words spilled out of her, a confession like poison. "They called me every awful name there is." She choked on her words, and I answered them. I smiled for them, I let them touch me, I did all of it just to stay alive. That is what you have in your house now, Caleb. Not a lady, just used goods, just dirt. She gasped for air, waiting for him to look away in disgust. But Caleb did not step back one bit. He stepped toward her, reaching out. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm and steady. He made her look up at him. His eyes held no disgust at all, only a burning fire, an intense fury. That fire was not for her. It was for the world. "You think that makes you dirt?" His voice was a low growl. "That surviving makes you worthless?" Elena stared, shocked. "I fought in a war over patches of mud," Caleb said quietly. "I have done things. I have killed men," Elena looked one right in the eye, "and ended his life over a coat's color. You think my hands are clean?" He shook her gently. "We are all just grit, Elena, trying to see another sunrise. What you did to live, that is not your shame. That is their crime." He wiped a tear from her cheek. "Do not walk back into hell," he whispered. "I could not watch that." She looked at him then and saw the honest truth. He was not judging her. He understood. The wall of shame in her crumbled. She leaned into his chest and he held her tight against the cold wind. They stood together as the sun rose, two broken souls holding each other up. "Come home," he said softly. "Okay." But their peace was short-lived. 3 days later, ranch life called. They were out of coffee and flour, and fencing, staples. A trip to town was needed. "I will go alone," Caleb offered. "No," Elena said, her jaw set firm. "If I hide, they win. I am not ashamed." So they rode into Red Creek together. The wagon rattled down a quiet main street. Heads turned to watch them. Whispers followed them like dust down the road. Caleb pulled up to the store. "Stay close," he murmured as they stepped onto the boardwalk. It was not Jeb's men. These were younger, all ranch hands for Silas Grant. They had the look of hired muscle, with their clean hats and shiny spurs. One blond boy with a cruel mouth looked up from his knife. "Well now, look what we have here." A nasty voice called out just as Caleb reached for the door. "Well now, Morgan, I did not know you paid for company these days." Another man added, reckon you get a discount on used goods. Elena's face burned with shame. Caleb stopped dead in his tracks. He took a slow breath and turned around. The young men were grinning, spoiling for the fight they were paid to start. You got something to say to me? Caleb asked, his voice quiet as a storm cloud. The blond one drawled a foul insult about Elena that hung heavy in the air. Caleb gave no warning. The soldier he had kept buried for 15 years came right out. He moved with a speed that just did not match his age or his limp. 1 second he was still, the next his fist smashed into the boy's nose with a sickening crack. The boy's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the boardwalk without making a sound. The other two men hollered and charged him all at once. Caleb ducked a wild swing and drove his elbow hard into the second fellow's ribs. The third man grabbed Caleb, shoving him back against the store wall as Elena screamed, but Caleb twisted, using the man's own force to throw him into a stack of barrels. He stood breathing hard in the middle of the mess, his knuckles split and bleeding. He looked at them with cold eyes. Keep her name out of your mouths, he growled. That is quite enough, a voice boomed. Sheriff Brady marched toward them, a shotgun in his arm. Brady was a stout man whose loyalty had been bought by Silas Grant 2 years ago. Salt, Brady said, spitting and disturbing the peace. They started it, Elena cried out. They insulted us. They attacked him. But Brady paid her no mind at all. I saw what I saw, Missy, he said, pointing the shotgun at Caleb. You are under arrest, Morgan. Caleb looked at Elena's pale, panicked face. Go to the wagon, he told her gently. Go on back to the ranch. I am not leaving you here, she said. Go, Caleb commanded. Find Heron. You tell him what happened here. Do not stay in town. With that, Caleb slowly raised his hands. Brady stepped in and took his gun. 2 deputies appeared, grabbed Caleb by the arms, and started marching him to the jailhouse. Elena stood shaking on the boardwalk, watching them drag away the only man who protected her. She jumped in the wagon, whipped the horses, and tore out of that town, not to run, but to find help. In the small, foul-smelling jail cell, Caleb sat on a cot, tending to his bruised knuckles. That heavy iron door groaned open. Sheriff Brady walked in, with Silas Grant right behind him. Silas looked fresh as a daisy, not a speck of dust on him. Leave us, Silas said. The sheriff just nodded and pulled the heavy door shut. Silas pulled up a wooden chair and sat down, right outside the bars. He took a fancy cigar from his coat, clipped the end, and lit it up. The expensive smoke drifted into the cell. You got a heavy hand, Caleb, Silas said. That boy's nose is busted up pretty good. He should have learned some manners, Caleb said, his voice flat. Maybe so, but now you're facing assault charges, maybe even worse if the judge is in a bad mood. And you see, Judge Holloway and I, we have supper together every Sunday. Caleb didn't say a word, he just watched that smoke curl. I'm a businessman, Silas said, tapping the ash from his cigar, and I don't like waste. You sitting in a cell for 5 years is a waste. That girl out there starving is a waste. What do you want, Silas? The same thing I have always wanted, the deed to your ranch. Silas stood up and moved closer to the bars, his voice like honey and poison. Here is the bargain, Caleb. You sign the deed over to me, I will give you a fair price minus a little something for all this trouble you caused. Then you take that money, take the girl, and you leave. Go start over somewhere they do not know her name. And the charges, Caleb asked? Oh, they just disappear. The boy decides he does not want to press charges after all. Caleb looked at him. He saw the smug look in Silas's eyes. He thought he had Caleb backed into a corner. And if I refuse? Silas sighed, like he was disappointed. Then you go to trial. You will go to prison. And as for the girl, she will not last a week alone. The bank will foreclose on that ranch. Or worse, the wolves will come for her. Caleb, you know they will. Caleb got to his feet. He walked right up to the bars, standing nose to nose with Silas. You are right, Caleb said. The wolves will come, but I am not selling my land to the head wolf. Silas's face went hard. You are a fool. You are choosing your pride over her life. No, Caleb said. I am not selling Silas. Not today, not ever. Silas stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he dropped the cigar and ground it out under his polished boot. Have it your way, Silas whispered. But remember this, Morgan. I am the future. Everyone pays in the end. He turned and walked out. The heavy door slammed shut, locking Caleb alone in the growing dark. Caleb sat back down. He thought of Elena driving that wagon back by herself. A storm was coming, all right. But this storm was not made of rain. It was made of greed and fire. He did not know how he would get out of this. But he knew one thing for certain. He was done running. The morning light was gray and mean coming through the filthy jailhouse window. Caleb sat on the edge of the cot. His knuckles were swollen and purple, the skin split clean open from the fight. His face hurt, but that was a distant thing compared to the fire burning in his hip. The cold damp of that cell floor had worked its way deep into his bones all night. Waking up that old injury, something awful. The heavy iron door let out a long groan. Harlan was standing there, his face looking more worn than Caleb had ever seen. The old ranch hand held his hat, his knuckles white. Behind him, Sheriff Brady sat at his desk, slowly counting a stack of coins, making a show of it. "There is the bail," Brady said, not bothering to look up, "though I figure it is just good money tossed in a hole." Harlan paid the sheriff no mind. He walked into the cell area, his eyes finding Caleb. "Let's get you home, Caleb. The horses are waiting." Caleb pushed himself up. The room spun, with black spots dancing in his eyes. He grit his teeth and limped out of that cell. He did not give the sheriff a second look. He just took one painful step after another until his boots hit the boardwalk. The town of Red Creek was up and about, and it was watching. As Caleb and Harlan headed for the horses, everything on the street just stopped. Men loading wagons paused. Women crossing the dusty street stopped dead and turned to stare. It was not the kind of respect Caleb was used to. It was colder, sharper. "He has gone and lost his mind," a voice drifted over from the general store porch. A loud whisper. "Threw it all away for that kind of woman." Harlan tensed up, his hand moving toward his knife, but Caleb grabbed his arm. His grip was shaky. "Let it be," Caleb rasped out. "Let's just ride." They got on their horses. The effort of swinging his leg over the saddle almost made Caleb pass out. A sharp, tearing pain shot through his hip, knocking the wind right out of him. He slumped over the saddle horn, sweat popping out on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "You all right?" Harlan asked, keeping his voice low. "Just ride," Caleb ordered. They rode out of town with what felt like 100 pairs of eyes on their backs. The western sky was turning a bruised purple and black. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath before a big storm. It was the kind of weather that makes folks jumpy. They rode for the first hour without a word. Harlan kept looking over, worry growing as he watched Caleb slump further in the saddle. The rancher's face was white as a sheet. His breathing was fast and shallow. The wind started howling, whipping the sagebrush around. The air got real cold. Thunder rumbled, a low growl you could feel in your bones. "Caleb!" Harlan yelled over the wind. Caleb did not answer. He yanked his horse to a stop. He leaned over the animal's neck and started coughing, a wet, hacking sound that seemed to rip him apart. When he pulled his hand from his mouth, his leather glove was spotted with bright red blood. Harlan was right there beside him, grabbing the reins. "You are bleeding inside," Harlan shouted. "The fight! You have got the fever!" Caleb gasped. "The hip! It has gone bad!" He tried to straighten up, but another wave of pain doubled him right over. The damp cell, the fight, and all the worry had turned that old wound bad. The infection he had fought so hard against was back. That old wound, quiet for years, had come back roaring. Harlan looked toward town and said, "We've got to get you to a doctor." "No," Caleb wheezed. "Not the town. They won't help me. Just get me to the ranch." "We'll never make it," Harlan argued. He yelled as the first fat drops of rain hit the dry ground. "Look at that ski." A solid wall of water was racing toward them. It was like a gray curtain erasing the horizon. Then lightning split the sky, hitting the ground not far off. The crack of thunder made the horses scream in fear. "The line cabin," Caleb managed to gasp, pointing. His trembling hand aimed for the foothills. "North Ridge. It's closer." They pulled their horses around, spurring them into a dead run. The heavens just opened wide. It was not rain, it was a flood. falling in solid sheets and turning the earth to slick mud. Then hail, about the size of marbles, started to fall, stinging their faces and their hands. They rode with their heads down, completely blind in the storm. Caleb was barely even conscious. He was just clinging to the saddle horn. Every single jolt of the horse sent a spike of pure, hot agony through him. He was burning up with fever, but the ice-cold rain soaked him clear to the bone. They finally reached the line cabin. The storm was a full-blown gale by then. The cabin was just a crude little shack made of rough logs. Harlan leaped from his horse and kicked the door open. He grabbed Caleb, hauling him right out of the saddle. Caleb's legs gave out the second his boots hit the ground. Harlan caught him and dragged him through the mud. He pulled him into the dark little cabin, and Elena was there. She had arrived only an hour before. She'd been driving the wagon like crazy to get help, but the storm had forced her to take shelter right there. She found Harlan, and they were about to head to town themselves when Caleb rode up. "Caleb!" Elena screamed. She rushed over to them. "Help me get him to the bunk," Harlan grunted, straining under Caleb's dead weight. Together, they managed to lift him onto the narrow wooden bunk. The cabin was absolutely freezing inside. It smelled of damp wood and dust. Harlan struck a match, lighting an old kerosene lantern that hung from a nail. The yellow light showed just how bad off Caleb really was. His eyes were glazed over, rolling back in his head. His breath rattled deep in his chest. "Get his coat off of him," Elena ordered, her own hands flying to the buttons. They stripped off the heavy duster and his flannel shirt. When they saw his left hip, Elena gasped. She slapped a hand right over her mouth. The old bullet wound was not just a pale scar anymore. It was a swollen, angry purple and red mess. The skin around it felt hard and was hot as a branding iron. Red streaks were already shooting up toward his ribs. "It's poisoned," Harlan said in a low voice. "His blood is poisoned." Caleb groaned, thrashing his head from side to side. "My knife! In the saddlebag!" "You cannot use a knife," Elena said. Her voice was shaking badly. "You're shaking too much." "Got to cut it," Caleb mumbled, his teeth chattering. "Or the fever. It takes the heart." He tried to push himself up, but his arm collapsed and he fell back with a cry of pain. Harlan looked straight at Elena. "He's right, girl. If we don't get that poison out of him, he is a dead man." "Before daylight. That poison is moving way too fast. I just cannot do it," Elena whispered, backing away. "I cannot cut him." "You have to," Heron said, his voice low and serious. "My own hands are too stiff with the arthritis. I cannot hold a blade steady. It has to be you." Elena looked down at Caleb. He was watching her, his gray eyes clear for a terrible second. "Elena," he rasped out, "please." The wind howled and slammed against the old cabin walls like a wild animal. The roof leaked in one corner, a steady drip that sounded like a clock counting down the seconds he had left. Elena took a deep breath. "Get the knife, Heron, and the whiskey." Heron did not waste a second. He grabbed Caleb's long hunting knife and a flask of whiskey from the saddlebags. He poured some liquor over the blade to clean it, then handed the flask to Caleb. "Drink," Heron said. "Drink all of it." Caleb drank, coughing as the whiskey burned his throat. He emptied the flask and let it fall. Elena took the knife. Her hand was shaking something fierce. She looked at the angry, swollen flesh and knew what she had to do. She had to cut deep into that old scar to get to the poison. She had to hurt the only man who had ever shown her a lick of kindness. She just could not do it. If she heard him scream, if she was the cause of his pain, she knew she would fall apart. She looked around the room, desperate. Her eyes landed on a piece of leather strap hanging from a peg on the wall. "Give me that," she said, pointing. Heron snatched the strap and handed it over. Elena cut about a 6-inch piece of the tough leather. She knelt down beside Caleb on the bunk. "Caleb," she said, her voice shaking. He just looked at her. "I am going to do it," she promised. Tears started to fall down her cold cheeks. "But I need you to help me first. Anything," he whispered. She held up the piece of leather. "Put this in my mouth," she begged him. "Please." Caleb stared, confused by the fever. "Put the strap in my mouth," Elena repeated, her voice soft. "I need something to bite down on. If I scream, I cannot stop. I cannot lose my nerve once I start. Please, Caleb, Give me something to hold on to. And then he understood. She was not asking to be protected. She was asking for a way to get through the pain of hurting him. She needed an anchor for her own fear, so she could be strong enough to save his life. Slowly, Caleb reached up. He took the leather strap from her. His feverish fingers gently brushed against her lips. Open, he whispered. Elena opened her mouth, and Caleb placed the thick leather between her teeth. She bit down hard, tasting old salt and oil. She gave him a small nod, her jaw clenched tight. Harlan moved to the head of the bed. I will hold his shoulders down, he said. Elena stared at the wound. She took a breath and tightened her grip on the knife. She bit down on that leather until her jaw ached, and then she made the cut. Caleb's whole body arched off the bunk with a terrible sound from deep in his throat. Heron threw his weight on him, holding him still. Elena never looked at his face. She could not. She focused only on the knife, on the feel of it cutting through the tough skin. As the blade sank in, she bit down on the leather so hard her teeth felt loose. A scream was stuck deep in her throat, held back only by the strap. Her tears fell hot on Caleb's burning skin. Deeper, Harlan commanded. She sobbed and pushed the knife farther in. Corruption and blood poured from the wound. Suddenly, Caleb stopped struggling. He went limp, finally passed out from the pain. It is done, Harlan said softly. It is done, girl. Elena dropped the knife. She spat the leather strap out, its surface scarred by her teeth. She fell forward, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder near the fresh bandage. Her whole body shook with powerful sobs. She had hurt him and she had saved him, but the feel of that knife cutting his skin would stay with her forever. Easy now, Harlan said, patting her back. You did well. He is breathing easier. She could not speak, just wept into his neck, feeling his steady heartbeat. The storm raged outside all night long, shaking the little cabin. But inside, the worst was over. Harlan had fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. The lamp burned low, making long shadows dance across the walls. Caleb was pale, but his fever was breaking. His skin felt cool and damp. Elena sat on a stool next to him, just watching his chest rise and fall. Caleb groaned and his eyes fluttered open. It took a moment for him to focus. He looked up at the ceiling, then turned to her. Lena, he rasped. I am here, she whispered. He tried to lift his hand, and she grabbed it gently. She pressed his rough hand to her cheek. You stayed, he said. I told you, she answered, her voice thick. I am not running anymore. Caleb's eyes went to her mouth, seeing the small bruise from the strap. He reached up and gently traced her lip with his thumb. I'm sorry, he said. A watery little laugh escaped her. Sorry? You almost died. I had to cut you. I am not afraid of pain, Caleb whispered. I have lived with it for 15 years. Then what were you afraid of? She asked him. I was afraid of losing you, he said. When the fever took hold, I saw you walking away. That scared me more than any knife. Elena pressed her face into his palm. There is no gate anymore, Caleb, she said. There is only this. He could feel the heat returning to him, a good warmth this time. They just lay there listening to the hail. I had a brother, Caleb said into the dark. Samuel. He was the best of us, did not have a mean bone in his body. He liked to draw pictures of birds. You mentioned him, Elena said softly. I could not save him, Caleb said. He was shot over a water hole. He died right there in the dirt while I was trying to stop the bleeding. I have been trying to stop the bleeding ever since. My mother, Elena whispered, sang Arapaho songs on windy days. She said the wind was the breath of our ancestors. When she passed, I thought the world had gone silent. It is not silent, Caleb said. No, she agreed. It is loud and cruel, but sometimes it brings the rain. She moved a little closer. Her hand came to rest on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady beat. The wall that had stood between them, the line between boss and worker, savior and saved, it was all washed away. Caleb's free arm came around her. He pulled her in close against him. Elena looked up at him. His face was just inches away. The dim light made the scars on his face seem softer. He did not look like the fearsome man the town whispered about. He just looked like a man who had finally set down a heavy burden. This time she did not hesitate. She did not think about what it would count or about surviving. She just leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft touch at first, like a question being asked in the dark. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He kissed her back, and then all the hesitation was gone. It was not the desperate grabbing she was used to from the saloon. It was not a taking. It was a giving. His hand found her hair, pulling her a little closer. Her own hands traced the old scars on his skin. They were like the invisible wounds she carried inside herself. The feeling that rose up between them was powerful. It was born from fear and survival, but it was also tender. It was like they were both reclaiming a part of themselves. For Elena, it was the first time a man's touch was not a transaction. For Caleb, it was knowing his broken body could offer comfort. They moved together in that small bunk with the wild storm raging on outside. The past was forgotten. No ghost shared their bed tonight, only the warmth of their skin and the soft whisper of names, spoken like a prayer. They knew deep in their bones that they finally belonged completely to each other. The Wyoming sun rose looking peaceful, a stark contrast to the night before. The sky was a clear sheet of blue. It was scrubbed clean of any clouds. The air smelled sharp and new, like wet sage after a hard rain. But the land below told a different tale. The plains were all tore up, with deep gullies carved in the earth by the flood, and broken cottonwood limbs were scattered in the mud like old bones. Inside the small line cabin, the morning sun was harsh on Caleb Morgan. He sat on the bunk, his face pale as old paper. The fever had finally broken during the night, leaving him weak and shivering, but blessedly alive. His bandage was stained, but the angry heat from the wound was gone. Elena moved about the small room with a fierce energy. She packed their few belongings quickly and with purpose, stopping only to check on Caleb. She touched his forehead with the back of her hand, her touch quick before she pulled away to button his shirt. She was not a guest in his house anymore. She was a soldier holding the line. "We need to move," she said, handing him a tin of cold coffee. "The roads will be pure mud. If we wait, you will not be able to ride." Caleb took the cup, his hand shaking some. He looked at her over the rim. "You sure get bossy when you are scared." "Elena, I am not scared," she snapped, pushing his hat down on his head. "I am angry. There is a big difference." She helped him get to his feet. It was a clumsy, painful ordeal. Caleb grunted, leaning heavy on her shoulder. But she did not give way. She was small, but she had the tough, desperate strength of someone who had carried burdens heavier than any man. She guided him out into the bright sunshine where Harlan was already getting the horses ready. The old cowhand looked at Caleb, then at the bloody bandage showing through his torn trousers. "You look like death warmed over," Harlan said with a grin. "I feel worse," Caleb muttered. "Help me up." The ride back to the main ranch was a slow, agonizing crawl. The mud grabbed at the horse's hooves, and every lurch sent a new jolt of pain through Caleb's hip. He rode with his jaw set tight, sweat on his upper lip, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Elena rode right beside him, her gaze darting across the ridges, her hand resting near the front of her saddle. She was on the lookout for threats. She was guarding the man who could no longer guard himself. They came over the last hill that looked down on the ranch valley just after noon. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. Harlan stopped beside him. "Good Lord Almighty," Harlan breathed. The storm had done its damage. That was plain to see. Shingles were ripped from the barn and the windmill was bent over. But a storm had not done this. The fences of the south pasture were not just blown over. They had been cut. The wire was coiled up in messy piles. The big oak water trough near the corral, a heavy thing that had stood for 20 years, was smashed to splinters, probably with sledgehammers, and the cattle were just gone. The home herd, the 60 head Caleb kept for breeding, had been driven off or scattered into the wild country past the ridge. Caleb stared at all the destruction. He did not say a word. He just nudged his horse forward, going down the slope with a scary kind of calm. They rode into the yard. The silence was total. No chickens were scratching in the dirt. No horses were calling. It was the quiet of a graveyard. Caleb got down near the barn, his leg giving out for a second before he caught himself on the rail. He limped to the main barn doors. There, carved deep into the wood with a heavy knife, were crude, sharp letters. The sap was still seeping from the cuts. "Sell or bleed." Elena just stared at the words. She felt all the blood drain from her face. It was not a warning. It was a promise from Silas Grant himself. Harlan walked up behind them, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "Well," Harlan said, his voice without a trace of its usual humor, "that is plain enough." Caleb reached out and touched the sticky sap. He traced the shape of the first letter. "He was here," Caleb said softly, "while we were trapped. He sent his men." Harlan took off his hat, his face etched with worry. "Caleb, you need to look at this. The cattle are gone. The fences are all torn down, and you can barely stand up straight." "We can fix the fences," Caleb said without looking back. "With what money, son?" Harlan asked. "They will be back tonight. Next time they will burn this house down with us inside." Caleb finally turned, his eyes hard as stone. "What are you saying, Harlan?" "I am saying we pack up. We take the cash from the tin box and head west, maybe to Oregon." "You want me to run?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "I want you to live," Harlan corrected him. "There is no shame in knowing when you are beat. This is not a fight, son. It is an execution." "I am not running," Caleb said firmly. "I buried my brother right on that hill. I built this house with my own 2 hands. I will not let a man in a silk suit drive me off my land." "He will kill you," Elena cried out. Her voice cut through the tension, and both men turned to her. "He will kill you, Caleb," she repeated, her voice shaking. "He does not care about any law. He wants you gone." "Then he better bring more men," Caleb growled, turning back to the house. Elena rushed and grabbed his arm. "Stop it," she pleaded. "Stop being a stubborn soldier and see what is really happening. This is my fault." Caleb looked down at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "It is me," she said, tears in her eyes. "He is doing this because I am here. He is using violence now so he can paint you as a fool." "A fool who lost his head over someone like me," she whispered. "If I had never come here, none of this would be happening." "No." Caleb's shout echoed across the yard, startling her. He never yelled. "Do not you dare give him that power," Caleb said, his chest heaving. "This is not your fault. Silas Grant is a wolf. He wants this land and its water. You are just the excuse he tells folks in town." "I do not care," Caleb said, slamming his hand on the barn door right over the carved letters. "You are with me now, and I do not run." He looked her right in the eye, his face pale but determined. "I am staying," Caleb said, his voice softening to a whisper. "If you want to go with Harlan, I will not stop you." He turned and limped back to the house, letting the screen door slam shut. Harlan watched Elena tremble in the yard, his expression sad. "He is a stubborn man," he said softly. "But he is right about one thing, girl. This is not on you. It is the world. It just cannot stand a man trying to make it on his own." He turned and limped inside, letting the screen door slam shut. Elena just stood in the yard, trembling. Harlan watched her with a sad face. "He's a stubborn old mule," Harlan said gently. "But he is right about one thing, girl. It is not you. It is the world. This world just cannot stand to see a man trying to make his own way." For 3 long days, things were quiet. They worked in a heavy silence. Caleb, too hurt to ride, sat on the porch with his rifle. He just kept cleaning it over and over. Harlan rode the property lines, mending what fence he could. Elena kept the house going, but the quiet between her and Caleb was stretched as tight as a fiddle string. On the 4th day, a rider finally showed up. It was not Silas, and it was not the sheriff. It was a young fella, no more than 16, riding an old mule. He looked scared to death as he got near the porch where Caleb was sitting. "Mr. Morgan?" the boy squeaked out. Caleb's hand rested on his rifle, but he did not raise it. "What can I do for you, son?" "Sheriff Brady gave me a nickel to bring this out here," the boy said. He tossed a folded envelope onto the porch steps. Then he spun that mule around and kicked it into a run, like he figured he would get shot in the back. Elena came out the door, drying her hands on a rag. Caleb just stared at the envelope. He leaned forward with a wince and picked it up. He tore it open with his thumb and unfolded the paper. He read it once, and then he read it a second time. His face did not change, but all the color drained right out of it. What is it? Elena asked, stepping closer to him. Just some paperwork, Caleb said quietly. He handed it over to her. Elena took the letter. It was an official notice of seizure from the court. It said that Caleb Morgan was behind on a loan of $5,000 held by the Grant Land Cattle Company. It claimed the ranch itself was the security for this debt. It ordered him to be off the property within 7 days. If he refused, he would be forcibly removed by the sheriff. I never borrowed money from Silas, Caleb said softly. I have never borrowed a dime from anybody in my life. They are forgeries, Elena said, looking at the document. Look at the date. This thing says you signed it 3 years ago. It is a lie, Caleb said. A lie with a judge's seal right on it, Elena answered. Harlan came up the steps, reading the paper over her shoulder. So this is how he does it. The sheriff is not coming to arrest you for a fight. He is coming to evict you. If you fight him, you are shooting at the law. They will hang you and believe they did the right thing. Caleb crumpled the paper in his fist. He looked out at the empty land. He had been ready to fight off hired guns. He had been ready to hold his ground, but he did not know how to fight a piece of paper. We have to go to the judge, Harlan said. Judge Holloway. Silas has dinner with Holloway every Sunday, Caleb said with a bitter laugh. You heard him. The whole game is rigged, Harlan. And Elena stared at the paper in his hand. She thought about the words sell or bleed carved on the barn. She thought about the boy with a broken nose and the look in Silas's eyes. He had been so sure he could crush them, just because they were nobody special. We are not the only ones, she said. Caleb looked up at her. What are you talking about? Silas did not just show up yesterday, Elena said, her mind working fast. He has been buying up this valley for 2 years. Henderson at the store said he bullied the Higgins family out. The widow Miller lost her farm last winter. They sold out, Caleb said. Did they? Elena asked. Or were they pushed? Were they threatened? Did they get a paper just like this one delivered to their door? Caleb just shook his head. It does not matter. They are gone, or they are too scared to talk. Fear works because it makes people feel all alone, Elena said. She turned to face him with fire in her eyes. Blazin', you said you were a war dog, Caleb, an outcast. You think that makes you weak. But Silas, he thinks we are weak because we are quiet. What are you proposing, Caleb asked. We are going to town, Elena said, not to shoot, but to talk. We will find the folks Silas has hurt. We will get them to write it all down and sign their names. One man claiming forgery is just a desperate fella. 10 people claiming fraud. Now that is a conspiracy. A crooked judge cannot ignore a dozen witnesses if we make a big enough racket. Caleb laughed, a rough barking sound. You want to gather a posse of widows and shopkeepers? You think they will stand up for me? For us? No, Elena said firmly. I think they will stand up for themselves. We just have to give them a reason. It is suicide, Caleb said. We ride into town and Silas will have us arrested before we can talk to a single soul. Let him try, Elena said. If he arrests us for asking questions, he proves he has something to hide. She knelt before his chair, taking his rough hand. Caleb, hiding has never saved me. I hid in kitchens and alleys. I hid in my room. It never stopped them. The only time they ever stopped was when you stood in the street and looked them right in the eye. We have to look this whole town in the eye. Caleb looked at her. He saw the old hurts in her soul, the fear she lived with, and still she was asking to walk right back into the fire. Do you really believe this can work? He asked. I believe the truth is the only weapon we have left, she said. Caleb glanced at Harlan. The old man shrugged. It is a long shot, Caleb, but it beats dying in a shootout at the barn. Caleb took a deep breath. He stood, testing his bad leg. The pain was there, sharp and familiar, but it held. Saddle the horses, he said. The ride into Red Creek was different this time. They did not ride fast. They rode at a walk side by side. Caleb sat tall, despite the pain gnawing at his hip. Elena rode a mare from Harlan wearing a clean shirt of Caleb's that she had tied at the waist. She wore no bonnet. She wanted them to see her face. They reached town around midday. The street was busy. As they moved down the main road, talk just faded. The silence spread out from them like a wave. They stopped at the livery stable first. "Why here?" Caleb asked. "Mr. Abernathy," Elena said. "The blacksmith. Silas's men beat his son last month. I heard them in the saloon laughing about how the boy refused to shoe Silas's horses for free." They dismounted. Elena's legs felt unsteady, but she walked into the smoky blacksmith shop with her head held high. Abernathy was a mountain of a man hammering on a horseshoe. He stopped when he saw them. He looked from Caleb to Elena, and his eyes narrowed. "I do not want any trouble, Morgan." Abernathy grunted. "We do not want trouble either, Mr. Abernathy," Elena said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the anvil's ring. "We want to know if it is true Silas Grant's men broke your son's arm." Abernathy dropped his hammer with a clang. "Who told you that?" "It does not matter," Elena said. "Silas is trying to take Caleb's ranch with fake papers, claiming Caleb owes him money. We are going to the judge, but we need to show that Silas is a liar and a thief." Abernathy wiped his sooty hands on his apron. "You go against Silas and you get my boy crushed. His arm is still in a sling, so what are they going to break next time? If you stay quiet, you are just telling them it is all right to do it again." Abernathy looked down at the dirt floor, then at the fire in his forge. He finally looked at Caleb. "Is it true?" Abernathy asked. "About them papers? He claims I signed a note for $5,000. Caleb said, "I never took a single dime." Abernathy spat right into the fire. "He came here offering to buy my place for 10 cents on the dollar. Said if I did not sell, well, accidents happen." "Will you write that down?" Elena asked. "Will you sign it?" Abernathy took a long moment, then nodded. "I ain't much with words, but I will make my mark." They started going from door to door. It was slow, hard work. Plenty of doors were slammed in Elena's face. Some folks spat on the ground as they passed, but some of them listened. They found the widow Miller living in a little shack behind the church, washing clothes for a few coins. She was a frail woman with eyes as hard as river stones. When Elena explained what they were doing, the woman did not even hesitate. "He killed my husband just as sure as if he'd shot him," Mrs. Miller said, her voice shaking with rage. "Worked him to an early grave and then stole our deed after his heart gave out. I will sign your paper. I will sign it in blood if you want me to." They went to the dry goods store. They went to the boarding house and found a ranch hand who had been fired. Slowly, the piece of paper in Elena's hand began to fill up with names. It became a list of grievances, a collection of small cruelties that, when put together, painted a clear picture of a tyrant. But to get the last name, they had to go into the saloon. Elena stopped across the street from the Lucky Star. Her breath caught in her throat. The swinging doors, the smell of stale beer wafted out and made her stomach turn. This was the place where she had been treated like nothing. "We do not have to go in there," Caleb said, seeing the look on her face. "Yes," she said, "we do. Tobias the Swamper. He saw Silas pay the sheriff off. I know he did. He told me about it one night when he was drinking." "Elena," Caleb said softly. She looked up and he was standing close, his body shielding her from the street. He was not trying to stop her. He was just offering his quiet strength. "I can do this," she said. She walked across the street, her boots clicking on the boardwalk. She pushed right through the swinging doors. The saloon went dead silent. Ali, the bartender, froze with a glass in his hand. Heads turned. Men who had jeered at her. Men who had treated her like she was for sale. She felt the shame rise up hot and choking. She wanted to run. She wanted to just disappear. Then she felt a steady hand on the small of her back. Caleb. He was right there. He was not looking at the men. He scanned the room with a calm, dangerous boredom. "Where is Tobias?" Elena asked. Her voice did not shake one bit. "Well now," Ali sneered. "We do not serve your kind here, Elena. Get out before I—" "We are not drinking," Caleb said. His voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We are looking for Tobias." A small, scared man in the corner stood up, looking terrified. I am here." Elena walked over to him. The room parted for her. She did not look at the men. She looked straight and through them. She was no longer the girl who scrubbed their floors. She was a woman on a mission. Tobias, she said, you told me Silas gave the sheriff a bag of gold coins the night the Higgins ranch burned down. Do you remember? Tobias licked his lips, his eyes darting around. I was drunk, Elena. I do not know anything. Silas is taking the valley, Tobias. Will he leave you anything? Or will he just burn it all? Tobias saw their fear. He saw Caleb, hand on his gun, ready to die for her. So Tobias caved. Tobias whispered, a heavy leather bag. Write it, Elena said, passing a pencil. At sunset, they had 7 names, not an army, but a start. Too dark to ride back. Caleb was worn out. They got a room, over the livery stable, a small room that smelled of hay. One narrow bed, a window to the alley. Caleb sat down heavily. He groaned, pulling off boots, his face gray. Elena poured some water. She brought it over. Wash up. He wiped the dust from his face. You were brave today, Caleb said. I was terrified, she confessed. I felt sick in there. You hid it well, he said, like a queen. Elena looked at her hands. I'm just a woman tired of running. Caleb took her hands. We have the names. Tomorrow, we ride. We find the judge. What if Silas owns him? Elena asked. Caleb was quiet. Then we go down fighting together. The words hung there. They were on a cliff's edge. The papers might work, or they might burn. Elena blew out the lamp. The room went dark, lit by moonlight. She turned to him, not wanting to talk, just to feel alive. Caleb, she whispered, pulling him down onto the straw mattress. The heavy exhaustion they felt just disappeared. All that was left was a desperate need as they held on to each other. As if the world was ending. His rough hands memorized her skin. Her hands were in his hair, pulling him closer. This was not gentle. It was fierce, driven by the gun's shadow, a silent need to survive. Every touch was defiance. Every breath, a claim they were alive. Later in the quiet, he kissed her forehead, his arm a shield. I love you, he whispered in the dark. The first time he had ever said it, tears slipped down her face. I know, she said. The wind howled outside. It rattled the eaves, a whisper of the reckoning to come at dawn. Dawn did not break with light. It broke with a rifle shot in the quiet. It was that gray hour just before dawn broke over the valley. Caleb Morgan had been up for an hour, sitting with a cup of cold coffee. He was watching the yard, expecting them. Silas Grant wasn't a man to let things go. And that petition he and Elena passed around town was a real declaration. A declaration of war. But the first shot didn't hit the house. It hit old Harlan by the barn. Caleb saw the old man spin, clutching his shoulder before he crumpled in the dust. Harlan! Caleb roared, kicking his chair back. He grabbed his Winchester and burst right out the back door. He ignored the pain in his hip. Elena was right behind him, a big revolver in her hand. Another shot kicked up dirt near Caleb's boot. The gunmen were just silhouettes on the ridge, just cowards firing from the dark. Get him inside, Caleb yelled, firing back to keep their heads down. Elena ran straight to Harlan. The old fellow was groaning, with blood seeping through his fingers. She grabbed the back of his vest and dragged him into the tack room on pure adrenaline. Then came the smell. It was the sharp, awful scent of kerosene. A torch flew through the air, trailing smoke before it landed right in the haystack. The dry grass caught instantly. A whoosh of sound, and a wall of orange flame leaped for the barn roof. The fire! Elena screamed from the doorway. Caleb looked at the ridge, then back at the fire. The shooting had stopped. Their dirty work was done, and now they were leaving. Caleb dropped his rifle and ran for the water troughs. They were half empty, but there were buckets. Start the line, he shouted. For the next 2 hours, they fought the fire, not the men. That fire roared like a living beast, just eating the haystack and licking at the barn. The heat was blistering hot. Caleb and Elena fought it side by side. They hauled buckets until their arms screamed and beat the flames with wet saddle blankets. They were coughing in the thick black smoke that choked out the very air. Ash fell around them like dark snow. The cattle in the lower pens started to panic. Caleb ran to the gate, throwing it open to let them scatter into the pasture. 3 of the calves were trampled in the chaos, and an old steer's heart just gave out. By the time the sun was fully up, the fire was finally dead. The barn was scorched but standing. The haystack was just a smoldering pile of black ash. Caleb slumped against the water trough. He was heaving for air, his face black with soot. Elena sat on the ground nearby. Her dress was ruined, her hands blistered. "We saved it," she wheezed. Caleb didn't answer. He just pushed himself up from the water trough and hobbled to the tack room. Harlan was laid out on a pile of saddle blankets, his face the color of ash. The bullet had gone clean through the fleshy part of his shoulder. It missed the bone but tore up muscle and veins something fierce. He had lost a whole lot of blood. "Caleb," Harlan whispered, his voice thin as a thread. Caleb knelt beside him. "Just rest now, Harlan. We're gonna get the doctor." "Not for me," Harlan gasped out. "You saved this land, Caleb. Don't you let that son of a gun win." Well, that attack on the Morgan Ranch did not work out the way Silas Grant had planned. He thought he could break Caleb's spirit. He wanted to scare the whole town into silence. But that column of smoke rising from the valley acted more like a signal fire. The news spread through Red Creek faster than a prairie fire before noon. The story went from the blacksmith to the general store. It made its way to the saloon. "They shot the old man," people said. "They tried to burn them out." Now some folks held on to their old ideas. They whispered that Caleb brought all this trouble on himself. They said a man living with a woman with a pow was just inviting the devil in for supper. But many other folks, they got real quiet. They looked at that smoke and they remembered. They remembered their own sons being pushed around and their own land being taken. Shooting an old man in the back and burning animals, well, that crossed a line no decent person could ignore. About 3 days later, the territorial judge rode into town. Judge Holloway was an old-timer with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it was carved from Texas granite. He was not in town for his usual Sunday dinner with Silas. No, sir. He came because a whole bundle of letters had landed on his desk. Letters sent all the way to the Capitol. They were signed by a blacksmith, a widow, a saloon sweeper, and a dozen other good people. They all told a story of fraud and violence. The hearing was held in the Red Creek Courthouse, a drafty old building with warped floors. Sunlight cut through the dirty windows, lighting up the dust dancing in the air. That room was packed to the gills. Every bench was full. Men stood along the back walls, holding their hats in their hands. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, tobacco, and pure tension. Caleb sat at the defendant's table. He wore his only suit, brushed clean but worn mighty thin at the elbows. He looked plumb worn out, his face drawn from the pain and from long nights spent guarding the ranch. Elena sat right beside him. She wore a simple gray dress, buttoned all the way up. She kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to hide that they were shaking. Across the aisle sat Silas Grant. He looked mighty fine in a dark suit, looking as confident as a rooster in a henhouse. His lawyer, a slick fellow from the city, was shuffling papers on their table. That's when Judge Holloway banged his gavel down hard. The sound cracked like a whip. "This court is now in session," Holloway's voice boomed out. "We are here to get to the bottom of this lien held by Grant land and cattle against the property of Caleb Morgan." Silas's city lawyer got to his feet. He was a smooth talker, sharp as a tack, and twice as mean. He laid out all the documents, the loan papers, the whole shebang. He painted Caleb as a failing rancher, a man whose good sense had been worn down by loneliness and the horrors of war. "Mr. Morgan is a tragic figure, folks," the lawyer said, pacing the floor. "He is a man who simply cannot manage his own business. And recently he has fallen under the influence of some questionable company." He waved a hand in Elena's general direction. It was a gesture full of dismissal and disgust. "Reverend Thorne to the stand," he called out. The preacher puffed out his chest and walked up. "Self-importance. It is a moral decay." "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice full of false piety. "Mr. Morgan has taken a woman of ill repute into his home, a woman known for selling her affections. This relationship, it has clearly clouded his judgment. He fights in the streets. He defies the law. It is the natural consequence of sin." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as every head turned to look at Elena. She felt the weight of their judgment. She saw the town ladies whispering and the men smirking. Caleb shifted in his seat, his jaw tight as a rope. He started to stand up for her, but Elena put a firm hand on his arm. "No," she whispered. "This is my fight." When it was Caleb's turn, he stood. "I do not have a lawyer, Your Honor," Caleb said. "I will speak for myself, and I have a witness." He looked right at Elena. She stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she walked to the witness chair with her head high. She sat down and looked at the judge, then at the crowd. "State your name," the judge said flatly. "Elena Marquez," she said, her voice soft. "Speak up," the judge commanded her. Elena took a deep breath. She looked at Caleb, who gave her the slightest nod. His eyes said, "I am here." "My name is Elena Marquez," she said again, her voice ringing out, clear and steady. "And what are you to the defendant?" the lawyer sneered. "I work for him," Elena said. "I cook his meals, I tend to his house, and I love him." A gasp echoed in the room. "So you admit to being his companion?" the lawyer pressed. "You admit to your past in the saloon?" "I admit that I survived," Elena said. She turned to face the townsfolk. "My mother died crossing the desert when I was 12, she said. "I buried her with my own hands. My father died a year later. I was a child alone in a territory that does not care if a little girl lives or dies." She looked toward the front row. "I washed floors until my knees bled. I sewed until my fingers were raw. And when there was no work and no food, and winter was coming, yes, I did what I had to do." She looked to the men standing at the back of the room. "I was used by men who claimed to be upstanding citizens, men who sit right here in this room today. They go to church on Sunday, then visit the saloon on Monday. They called me filth, but they were the ones who paid the coin that bought my bread." The room was completely silent. The storekeeper's wife looked down at her hands. A man in the back pulled his hat down low. "Silas Grant says Caleb Morgan is corrupted," Elena continued, her voice rising with emotion. "He says I am the cause of his downfall. But let me tell you who Caleb Morgan really is." She looked at Caleb and her eyes filled with tears. "He found me on the road in a storm. He did not ask for a single thing. He gave me his coat. He gave me a warm room. He treated me with a respect I had forgotten was possible. He is the only man I have ever met who did not want to take something from me." She turned back to the judge. "Silas Grant wanted his land and his water, and he is willing to burn barns to get it. He calls me a fallen woman to hide the fact that he is a thief. I sold my body to survive. He sold his soul for greed, soul for dirt." She stopped talking. The room fell into a heavy, shameful silence. The story Silas had built about the crazy rancher and the temptress shattered against her honesty. Caleb just watched her, his heart nearly bursting with pride and a fierce tenderness. She was no victim. She was a giant. The judge cleared his throat, looking at Silas. His face was pale with rage. The judge then called up Josiah Perkins, a clerk for Grant's company. He was a small, nervous man with inky fingers. He walked to the stand like a man to his own hanging. Elena and Caleb had not found him, but a young deputy, sick and tired of the corruption, had. He brought Josiah in that morning because of the petition. The judge said, "Mr. Perkins, did you prepare these loan papers?" Josiah glanced at Silas, whose eyes promised a world of hurt. Then he looked at Elena and how she held her head so high. "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered. "And did Caleb Morgan sign them in front of you?" Josiah was trembling, gripping the railing hard. "No," he said. The courtroom exploded. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Mr. Perkins, look at me," the judge commanded. "Who signed them?" Josiah closed his eyes. "I did, Your Honor. Mr. Grant told me to. He told me to copy the signature from an old bill of sale. He said Mr. Morgan was going to lose the land anyway, so we were just speeding things up." Just like that, it was all over. The lie was out. The web he'd spun for 2 years unraveled. Silas Grant jumped to his feet, his face twisted with rage. He was not a man who lost. His little kingdom was collapsing. "You lying little rat!" Silas screamed, reaching into his coat. Everything seemed to slow down. A glint of metal, a small gun barrel. It was a derringer. He was not aiming at the clerk. He leveled it straight at Elena. She was the one who turned the town on him. Elena froze, staring right down the barrel. No! Caleb moved on pure instinct. The same reflex that kept him alive in the war took over. He lunged across the small space between them. He threw his body right in front of Elena just as the gun went off. The sound was small, like a firecracker, but the impact was heavy. Caleb jerked back into Elena, sending them both to the floor. The room erupted in chaos. Men were yelling. The deputies finally woke up and tackled Silas, wrestling him to the ground. He cursed and fought like a wild animal. Elena scrambled up. Caleb was on his back, a red stain spreading. It was high on his chest, near the shoulder. Caleb, she screamed, pressing her hands to the wound. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock. He gasped for air. I got him, he wheezed. Do not talk, she cried through her tears. Help, somebody help him. The doctor in the crowd pushed through the people. He knelt down, his hands moving fast. It's in the shoulder, the doctor said. The doctor called out, his voice tight. It missed his heart, but he's bleeding out fast. We got to get him to the back room. Elena wouldn't let go of his hand. She held on so tight her nails dug right into his skin. Stay with me, she whispered, fierce as a mama bear. You promised me, she said. You told me you were not scared of a little pain. Caleb just looked at her. All the noise in that courtroom started to fade away. The scuffle, the judge banging his gavel, it all just disappeared. The only thing he could see was her face. Her dark eyes were filled with fear, but also so much love. I am here, he mouthed to her. Right then and there, they put Silas Grant in shackles. With the clerk's story and half the town seeing him try to shoot Caleb, his power just vanished. It was gone like fog on a hot morning. The judge ordered him held without any bail to be sent to the big prison. He would wait there for his trial for fraud, for the fire, and for trying to kill a man. That same afternoon, the judge made another ruling. He announced that all of Silas's claims against the Morgan Ranch were worthless. Then he spoke about Elena's bravery for all to hear. He said that justice in these parts owed her a big thank you. But a thank you on paper is not the same as real life. Survival is about flesh and blood. And bless his heart, Caleb survived. That bullet shattered his collarbone and tore through a mess of muscle. But it missed his lung and the big artery. He spent 2 long weeks at the doc's house, burning up with fever. He was fighting off the infection that comes with a gunshot. And Elena, she never once left his side. She even slept in a chair. She wiped his forehead and spoon-fed him broth. She fought for his life, just like she did back in that little cabin. When he was finally strong enough, they laid him in a wagon full of straw and headed for the ranch. Coming home was different this time. As they passed through town, folks were not just staring in silence anymore. Old Mrs. Miller came running out of her house. She put a basket of fresh bread and jam right in their wagon. Mr. Abernathy, the blacksmith, gave them a nod. He even lifted his hammer, kind of like a salute. Even the sheriff, who was in a heap of trouble himself, tipped his hat. It was not exactly a parade. Some people still turned their heads, still could not accept a woman of her heritage, and a scarred man as their own kind. Meanness is like a weed with deep roots. It does not just die overnight, but at least the quiet was broken. When they finally got to the ranch, Harlan was there waiting. He was sitting on the porch, his arm in a sling, looking pale but stubborn as a mule. Took your sweet time, Harlan called out, but his voice cracked a little when he spoke. Had to get my rest, Caleb rasped with a weak smile as Elena helped him. I am getting old, Harlan. Well, summer gave way to autumn. The air got crisp, and the cottonwood trees by the creek turned to fiery gold. The whole ranch was healing up. The barn was fixed. The burned wood was replaced with new pine that smelled so good. Like a forest. The fences were back up, and the cattle they had gathered from the hills were getting fat on that fall grass. One evening, as the sun started to dip low, Caleb and Elena took a walk. They went up to the high ridge that looked out over the whole valley. Caleb walked slow, his limp a little worse than before. His left arm was stiff. That gunshot wound had left its mark. He could not move it like he used to, and it gave him another scar to carry. They stood there together, just watching the light change. The sky was painted with gold and red, a perfect Texas sunset. The wind was blowing, but it did not feel cold, was no longer a threat. It smelled of dry grass and cooling earth. Caleb took a deep breath, wincing a little, as the scar pulled. I have paid a high price for loving you, Elena Marquez, he said quietly. Elena looked at him, seeing the new lines on his face and the stiffness in his shoulder. Blood, a broken bone. My good name, he listed, and the foolish idea that I could ever live alone. Elena reached out and took his hand. Her own hands were calloused but strong. And what have I paid? She asked. Caleb looked at her, the woman who had bared her soul to save him. You paid with your silence, he said. You gave up the safety of Haydn. Elena gazed out at the rolling plains. I have paid my whole life just for the chance to stand somewhere without shame, she said softly. But today I went to the general store for flour, and not one person looked at me like I would dirt. She squeezed his hand. That is worth all the blood, Caleb. That is worth everything. Caleb lifted his good hand and cupped her face. His love for her was not a reckless, youthful fire. It was something tougher, built to last. The love of two folks who saw the worst of this world and still chose each other. You are my home, Elena, he said. Not this house, not this land, just you. And you are mine, she whispered back. They stood together as the sun sank low, bathing the world in a deep twilight blue. They were two souls, damaged and scarred by a cruel world. They would never be whole in the way some folks are. They would always carry the ghosts of their past. But as the first stars began to dot that big Wyoming sky, they turned and walked toward the ranch house, where a warm yellow light spilled out to greet them. Walking side by side, they were a steady flame in the dark, proof that they had survived it all. They had finally built a life that belonged just to them. And that's our story of Caleb and Elena. I sure do thank you all for riding along with us through all the heartache and dust of the West. I would be tickled to know where you're tuning in from. Please let me know in the comments below. If this tale touched your heart, I hope you'll subscribe to From Wild West for more stories just like it. We tell stories about survival and the strong spirit of the frontier, and I do read every single comment. Until our trails cross again, y'all keep your fences mended and your powder dry.